Good morning. My name is Maurice Crespi. I'm the managing partner of Schindler's Attorneys. Schindler's Attorneys is a co-founder of COBRA. COBRA was founded approximately 3 months ago by IQ Business, Engaged Turnaround, and Schindler's Attorneys. We now have over 45 partners who've all joined and pledged to assist businesses in distress in whichever way they can. Today we have a webinar, which is one of the ways that COBRA gives back and assists. They're informative webinars by experts by the COBRA partners. The COBRA partners have pledged to provide services on a pro bono basis to the extent that your business requires the assistance and is unable to pay for the assistance. Naturally, that is the case with most businesses at the moment. So please, if there's any way that we can assist, please send us an email to info@cobra.org.za or find details on our website, www.cobra.org.za. We also have a knowledge base on the website and all previous webinars. Today, please ask questions. We will not be focusing on business rescue. We have business rescue on Mondays. It's business rescue in a nutshell. You can also find a video on business rescue in a nutshell and we'll deal with it. So today we're going to steer clear from business rescue, but we'll be dealing with negotiating. And today's topic is a deep dive into supply negotiations during difficult times by Angela Obree. Now, Angela's been with us before, and it ended up being one of our most popular webinars. I have no doubts that today's will be as popular and as insightful. So we're very, very grateful to Angela as COBRA for joining today. Just a bit about Angela. Angela's a highly experienced negotiation consultant and has been a commercial mediator for almost 20 years. Most of her career has been in the international space in UK, Ireland, and Germany, but she's also worked with local companies in South Africa, Accenture, South African breweries, and Investec. And more recently, she led the negotiation between Edcon and Accenture towards the end of 2019. Angela is truly passionate about this topic and believes that the study of negotiation is never ending due to the many elements that contribute to an outcome. Incidentally, it's also the topic of her thesis. Her company, Amplify Business Group, has partnered with COBRA to provide negotiation support and expertise for distressed businesses, their suppliers, lenders, and even internal teams as they navigate their way through these unprecedented times. What's important to mention is that one of the services, pro bono services provided by COBRA, is indeed the negotiation between suppliers, between debtors, between creditors. We have qualified mediators who do just that. And the idea is not to put companies into business rescue, but to rather engage in these negotiations and to strike a balance, because that's what is needed at the moment. Liquidations aren't going to help anybody. There's no point in sucking blood from stone. So we certainly urge companies to creditors to not put that much pressure on their debtors and to rather encourage them to enter COBRA so that the likes of Angela can assist in the negotiations. So thank you so much, Angela. Before I move over to you, I'm going to introduce the remaining panelists. We have Gary Barachovitz from Schindler's Attorneys, Tasneem Khan from Schindler's Attorneys, Renee Klopper from IQ Business, and Emma Marseille from IQ Business. Angela, thanks so much once again. Over to you.
Thank you, Maurice, and thank you for having me back. This topic is big, so I'm going to jump straight in because unfortunately we only have this hour, and of course, as you know, those of you that know me, I can talk about this topic for days on end. So let me jump straight in and pop up the presentation. There we go. Okay, so as Maurice said, we're looking looking today at supply negotiations during difficult times. We're sitting in a global difficult time, and that is the COVID-19 pandemic, which is what I will be using as most of our examples today. But what's important is that in our supply negotiations, that what are the items that we need to consider, and how can we create value and rapport despite the difficult times, whether it's COVID or anything else. You've seen this slide before. Most of you probably have seen it. I'd love to start off any kind of negotiation talk with this, because it just reminds us that in a negotiation, what you see is only really, certainly from your counterparts, is only really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that goes into a negotiation, and so very little that you can see on the surface. You've got your physical environment and micro expressions and body language, sure, that you have right in front of you if you were able to negotiate in person. But there's a whole lot of other things that go in, that sit below the surface. Somebody's experience in negotiation, the economic environment, something that we're all looking at right now, whether they've put together a proper strategy and tactics and so forth. So what we're going to be looking at today is, and focusing on actually quite a bit, is, I've highlighted quite big here, is immersion, which sits on the surface, because immersion is something that you can see and that you can feel in a negotiation, but there's so much of it is below the surface. But before we do, I just want to remind you about the whole dimensions of the negotiation process. And what I've done is I've drawn up this model just to remind us that even though we are negotiating through difficult times, and even though it might be a last minute or unplanned negotiation, we still need to keep our eye on the ball. We still need to make sure that we're negotiating for the right reasons and that we're following process if we can. So this would be a process of an ordinary negotiation outside of a crisis, outside of a difficult time. To start off, the most important thing any top negotiator will tell you is that you need to prepare. That's more important than anything else. And unfortunately, with a crisis, sometimes we don't have the luxury of time. But in here, we've got preconditions, and I've said that, I've highlighted on the screen for you, that you start by looking at perhaps with your counterpart, you might have a terms of engagement, you might look at risk analysis or power analysis. This is certainly where you will be defining your strategy for your business, or if you're an individual negotiating. And all of this happens before, but the next three pieces is what happens during. These are the actual dimensions of the negotiation process. And these three pieces coming up on your screen shortly is what we're going to be focusing on today. Number one is the issues. What are we actually talking about in the negotiation? And more often than not, it's pricing, quantity, payment terms, scope, product specs, and so forth. Second item is, or the second dimension at least, is your strategies and tactics. This is not something that you have the luxury of seeing or from your counterpart. You usually have a view on what they might want or what their interests are. But for your side, you've been looking at what is your strategy for your business and what kind of tactic would you use to maneuver the negotiation towards an outcome. And lastly, all of this is underpinned by emotion. And I've been in many negotiations where people have said, I'm taking emotion out of this, and I just want to focus, I want to be logical and just focus on the facts and the problem on the table. And it's a good way to negotiate. But the truth is that we are human beings. We can't take the emotion out of it. We do feel happy when we get a move in the direction that we want. We do feel sad or disappointed if it's not going in the way that we had hoped. And in times of crisis, emotions are heightened. All of this, all three of these dimensions, whether the issues on the table, your strategies and tactics, and your emotions, all three of these are negotiated through the various forums, in person, on the telephone, in email, and through quick messaging like WhatsApp and so forth. In my last chat, we spoke about the complexities of everybody being in lockdown around the world, and suddenly you lose that ability to negotiate in person. And how do you deal with that? And all of that leads to an outcome. And finally, it's within a set time frame. So what happens during a crisis? how does it change? What is the impact during difficult times? Well, it's messed up my model completely, made it look like a complete mess on the screen. But number one, the first thing you might have noticed is that the time frame is usually reduced. So in a normal negotiation process, you might have the luxury of 6 weeks or more to plan for a really big deal. Whereas now, suddenly the rug's been pulled from under you and you find yourself having to look at renegotiate contracts that might only have been up for renewal in a couple of years' time and that you were quite happy with. On the preparation side, you haven't really got much time. Sometimes you get called from your suppliers or you call a supplier and you want to have this conversation and you want an outcome right there. I really recommend not doing that. I'd recommend taking a minute, stopping, and using this time to prepare. Everything in orange here is highlighted. Those things are impacted. So you might, for example, not have time to do a full due diligence that you would normally have undertaken, even with a supplier that you've been working with. You might not have time to go and look at pricing, for example, strategies and tactics. Your strategy may have changed completely because you've worked with this company, you've put a strategy in place, and you were quite happy with the engagement for the next 2 years, and suddenly they're going to business rescue, as an example. You may not have been paid for the last couple of months, but they're asking you to continue to provide your service in order to keep the company going. So what do we do? How does this change your strategy, and what type of tactics would you need to deploy as we go through this process? And finally, the piece that I've highlighted in orange at the bottom is the emotions. The emotion that I've dealt with a lot in the last couple of weeks is anger. I'm used to dealing with anger. Anger is a good emotion because it means that you care. And throughout my whole negotiation career, anger has been something that I've had to mitigate as we go through. But we're seeing it now far more and certainly much more amplified through the COVID crisis. So let's jump straight in and have a look at what can we do before negotiation to start preparing for if we're in this crisis. We now need to renegotiate with our client. What is it that we need to do? I can't possibly go through all the topics and every element of risk analysis and so forth, but the one item that I wanted to highlight to you is power today. Can you imagine, if you look at everybody on your screen, can you imagine having to face any one of these people in a negotiation? Every one of these people in here, you've got Richard Branson, you've got Nelson Mandela, Michelle Obama, even Heidi Klum. Every one of them brings a certain amount of personal power to the table. And whether it's fear, maybe you're fearful of negotiating against Putin, or maybe the honor of being in the same room as Michelle or the late Nelson Mandela. So power is important to stop and think about, because people often forget. They lose. Later on, I'll take you through an example of somebody who lost sight of their power and almost made a big mistake in a negotiation that was important to her. So one of the things we can do is certainly going in is to take a step back and look at what are our power sources. Where do they come from? Where power comes from, reward or coercive power. You've got legitimate power. So you've got the signed contract in your hand saying, "I've got a deal with you. We agreed on these pricing for the next 2 years." Look at PPE. PPE pricing has surged, and that doesn't stand in a crisis like today. If a company's gone into business rescue, your contract doesn't stand. But you also have the power of expertise and information that can be tapped into. Just because it's crisis, it doesn't mean you need to act in panic or in fear. You can still go and spend some time gathering that information that you need, particularly with regards to pricing. You can still spend some time finding an expert if you need to bring them in to help you, and look at other areas. You've got the power of numbers. So a team and again, I really encourage you to have a look at finding where's your personal power and think about where is their power on the other side. I mentioned pricing, and this has been particularly complex at the moment. You've probably noticed that all our newspapers and headlines are filled with, competition commission issues. They've had to hire a special team during this crisis to investigate all of the hikes that have been happening, as much as 900%. In fact, I saw an article the other day which had price hikes of up to 1,000%. How do you negotiate against that? And this is things we need. Suddenly, we've got PPE that we need now, not just in a hospital environment, but in all environments. Every one of us in our homes in South Africa have been told to buy a mask. Yes, we don't need the medical masks, sure, but suddenly the hospital's demand for PPE has gone up. Schools now need it, the shopping malls and so forth. So inevitably, the old supply and demand model is going to hike the price. How do you negotiate against that? We can't be reporting all that people have, but you can't be reporting every single negotiation to the Competition Commission. By the way, this is not just in South Africa. There's an article on BBC, Can Price Hikes Be Justified? And they've used that picture there that you see in front of you of toilet paper, because it's not just PPE. Of course, we're also seeing our basics, our essentials that have increased significantly. So what do? In 2015, there was an article posted on Harvard Business Review that I really, really enjoyed back then. And with all the price hikes and suddenly we've got powerful suppliers that are able to stand their ground during this crisis, and others are going into business rescue. It just triggered this, reminded me of this article. I went and looked it up, and I referenced it here for you if you want to go back and read the full piece. But what they had some ideas on how you can negotiate with powerful suppliers. What I particularly liked about this model is that they have also ranked them from your low risk right through to high risk ideas. And if we look into some of the detail on this, starting on the right-hand side of the slide in front of you, high risk tactic is to play hardball. Can we afford to withhold or cancel our orders? Not many people can. It is the best negotiation position to be in, to have the ability to walk away, but not many of us can afford to do so. Do we have grounds for litigation? Do you want to litigate with a supplier? Because remember, a crisis is short-term, usually, hopefully. And you need to consider your long-term relationship with your suppliers, or if you are the supplier with who you're negotiating against. So, the hardball route is high risk, but don't forget that sometimes you're driven by this emotion of anger and frustration and fear, and that could lead us to take a risky maneuver. Let's look at something else. So let's say, for example, you were a hospital. I've been working with one of the hospitals during this crisis, actually, to try and find them some PPE, and they've worked with the same suppliers for years on end. Suddenly, the pricing is off the charts. I was looking for N95 masks at the time. And what did we do? We immediately started to look for another supplier. We had to, out of desperation. It's considered a high risk move because, of course, your current supplier is not going to like that. But sometimes you're forced into this. If we can look at how we change how we buy. So, for example, I've seen a case of procurement consortiums get together. So there's 3 printers in the area, perhaps, and they may go to a powerful supplier and say, right, we're going to be buying together. Instead of buying 15 reams, we'll be buying 45 reams of this particular paper every month, and so forth. I really like this model because it highlights and offers some options and some strategies for negotiating with powerful suppliers. And the one I like the most, of course, given that I'm a collaborative negotiator, and given that we need to mitigate our risk as much as we can, we're sitting with so much other risk, economic risk and so forth during these times, is looking at finding ways to bring new value to your supplier. And that's not easy, and it means a lot of thinking outside of the box. But I'm going to give you an example of how we have created some value. I was working with a company who were shipping products from South Africa. I was working on a piece of work, and there was a concern because the logistics of transport from products from South Africa to Namibia just weren't making sense. It was too expensive. Of all the routes, it was the most expensive route. But it was they were receiving a big enough order to justify the relationship. And we started working with suppliers. So, even down to looking at the trucks and saying, what can we do to get to make these more efficient? We started negotiating with the tire suppliers. It was, a little bit that helped here. We looked at reconfiguring the trucks, and that helped actually, because we managed to get more product on one truck just by a simple, adjustment here and there. But again, it wasn't enough. Of all the routes, that route is just too expensive. So we sat with the supplier, with the purchaser, and we said, look, we want to continue to supply. We just we can't justify it. How do we do this? And many ideas, and too many to bring to the table came, and some of them were implemented and some were good, but again, they were just small little squeezes, and they were just giving us, small steps forward in the right direction. And I encourage everybody to come back, a couple of days later with new ideas, also look at other models and so forth. And one of the ideas was to create a revenue stream, an income stream. So what we did was we looked in Namibia for a supplier that was shipping into South Africa and found someone. And it wasn't easy because the trucks were rigged in a specific way, so not all products worked. But instead of sending empty trucks back, full trucks that way, and empty trucks back at a significant cost, we now charged to bring that product back into South Africa. And suddenly, that route that was the most expensive route of all of them became actually the best route of all, and became the cheapest, and in fact, it was a profitable route in the end. It took a lot of planning in advance, sure, because now you have three parties that need to be engaged. You need to make sure that it's become a weekly or every 10 days, as opposed to sending it as needed. But there was a bottom line. There was a bottom line impact. When looking at strategies and tactics, the most important piece of advice that I want to give to you today is when dealing with suppliers during a time of crisis, is to keep your eye on the ball. Remember what your long-term strategy is. Even if you have to change course, you've got to do a little bit of course correction now, keep your eye on the ball. Remember what it is that you're doing and that you want to achieve. And you may need to use different tactics to get there, but keep focusing on where you're at. The most important two things to look at, of course, is your importance of the relationships and the importance of the outcome. So what I'm seeing now is a lot of people are saying, and this is on both sides, by the way, working with suppliers and other, is saying, forget the relationship. I don't care. I want to be paid. I haven't been paid since February. And I've got staff to pay and I've got products and so forth. I don't care about the relationship. I care about the fact that I need to save my business, understandably. Whereas others are and some people are sitting in a more comfortable position, far more fortunate, when they're saying, actually, I care more about the relationship. I'm not going to chase payment. I'm not going to give my suppliers a hard time. The customers a hard time, because the relationship is far more important for me. So while they're in business rescue, I'll sit back. In fact, what a lot of them have even done is gone to them and said, how can I help you? No charge. How can I help you? So it's been quite interesting to see. Not many people are in that position, but it's interesting to see. So whilst ordinarily you'd be looking at a strategy of avoidance, or usually, hopefully, when you're working with a supplier, looking at a collaborative strategy, suddenly you're forced into taking other options. So for those people that are interested in just an outcome and just getting paid, they're taking a much more competitive approach. And that's fine, but just remember that it could be damaging in the long run. I've spoke to you about keeping your eye on the ball, about strategies and tactics. I'd like to give you an example of a negotiation that I worked on a couple of weeks ago. I had a call from a lady who is in the events industry. It's a very small negotiation, and she's very distressed because the events industry, as you know, pretty much from I think about February, just completely shut down in South Africa and earlier around the world probably. And she, out of sheer desperation, she started selling PPE. And there's a long lead time. She had to spend quite a bit of time because finding a supplier and finding a buyer. and she managed to secure a great buyer, and she managed to secure a supplier. And everything was going fine for a couple of weeks, except the one day she was battling on delivery, and the supplier said he's quite happy to deliver it himself. What happened? There was no contracts, because, as I say, when you're negotiating in a time of crisis, you often don't think about trying to follow proper process, and we should as much as we can. There was no contracts, and she got cut out. So the buyer said to the supplier, "I'll buy directly from you if that's okay." The supplier phoned her and told her now about the new arrangement, which was devastating for her. And he offered to give her 10% of the profits. But and that's great, you know, and not normal, by the way, because usually if you get cut out, suppliers tend to take it all. But it's, you know, given that she worked 2 months and finding this particular buyer alone, it was devastating for her. And her profits went from 100, to make the numbers rounded, went from 100,000 down to 10,000 as significant. You know, she called me crying, saying, "I've got a small baby and I've got a family, and I'm just going to phone him and tell him exactly what I think. It's so unfair. I've spent 2 months working on this." And I said, "Hang on a sec, let's take a step back. And she said, "I've got absolutely no power here, because they've taken it away, and I've worked so hard and what have you." So I said, "Let's take a step back. Let's talk about, how do you know this guy, first of all?" And I understand that she's heard of him. He's also in the events industry. And he's a lighting expert, and she's heard that he's really good at what he does. And she was actually looking forward to working with him at some point. She manages huge campaigns for the liquor industry, and they love the events. So, you know, and they're really working with her now about getting events off the ground for towards the end of the year, next year. And I said to her, I said, "Don't forget that this is a short-term need for both of you. You're both selling PPE because you have the short-term need, but you still hold power in that you still have these connections with big companies. And without an events manager and campaign manager, he won't be able to work with these companies. So remind him nicely, about that. Also, he came to you with his 10%. She felt that if she had to get something, that 25% is better. And I said to her, I said, you need to anchor that. It's very important. So yes, our tactics may have changed here, and we're having to use different ways of maneuvering towards a strategy. But if you think that 25% is more fair, ask for 50. Explain to him you spent 2 months working on it. I said, but be very, very careful of your wording. Watch every single word and be very clear about your emotion. Hold your emotion in place. Check yourself, and when you speak to him, be empathetic and understanding and so forth, but be careful. Instead of saying, it's very unfair, I've worked for 2 months and I've got a child to feed and crying and so forth, everybody has a sob story, nobody wants to hear it. I said, instead, say, I've worked in this industry for many years, I've got all the contacts, I've heard about you, I've been so looking forward to working with you. I said, you told me that, so it's not a lie, it's sincere. You've heard that he is a decent guy and he works fairly with everybody. So tell him that. That's actually one of Dale Carnegie's principles. Let him live up to a higher nobility. So say to him, I've heard that you like this and I really appreciate the 10%. I said, whatever you do, don't lose that 10%, bank it. So say to him, I appreciate it. I appreciate that you came to me, and so thank you for that 10%. I said to her, bank it. But explain to him that it's taken you 2 months to find this buyer, and not just that, explain your other value in that you're very good at finding buyers and that you're working on a whole lot of other buyers, but now you're a bit nervous about continuing to do so because you don't want it to be taken away. In the end, she had this conversation with him. He appreciated her. There is a degree of vulnerability, and she was open. And I said to her, be sincere. All these things that you told me, tell him. But instead of wording it, he's unfair and so forth, word it saying, that he is fair. And you've heard this about him in the industry. He was fair to phone you up for the 10% and ask for 50, anchor it at 50, because half of the work is finding the buyers and the other half is completing the order and delivering it and so forth. Anyway, she called me back a couple of days later. Amazingly, he settled on 50. I thought we would finish on about 40 or 30%. But he agreed that, and they're actually working really well now. He's going to find better suppliers, higher quality, better pricing. She's going to find more buyers and so forth. And they've actually set up they're actually working as a really, really good team. but that conversation could potentially have gone in a different direction, had she not first considered her personal power, his power, and then also anchored that negotiation at the right place. This leads us really nicely actually into the last piece of my what's now a very messy diagram, but looking at this last dimension, which is immersion. And there's so many emotions, and by the way, it depends on the definition. You can find a list of emotions as long as your arm, or 8 emotions, depend. But so I can't possibly talk to all of them and how we need to address them. But the ones that are typical in a negotiation and typically could derail them is ego and anger and fear and so forth. Anxiety is another one. I don't know if you've ever heard of the study, but I can't remember if I'm honest where it's from, but I could post a link afterwards if I find it. But they did a study on making decisions or negotiating under when you feel anxious. And how they did it was they had a whole lot of, I think, 300 odd couples put together, not married couples, and saying just partnered together for a negotiation, all of them negotiating the same case, but half of them they had in a room beforehand listening to calm classical music, and the other half they had in a room just silently in the background. They had the music from a movie called Psycho that I've never seen, but now I want to, because I'm quite intrigued to hear what music it is. And after 10 minutes, everybody went into the negotiation, and the results were quite staggering. To see that how something as simple as music in the background had affected anxiety, and it affected outcomes and decisions. The other element that we need to think about in negotiating crisis is the element of surprise. It's a seemingly comical picture right in front of you, but I want to take you through something that happened in 2014. I don't know if you're aware, but Irish Water, the island weren't paying for water at all. They didn't pay for municipal water. They received it and it was free. And a very controversial bill got passed that they're going to now start paying for water, and of course, to help maintain pipes and so forth. And it wasn't going to be a big expense, but it became very controversial. And so I was asked to work with Irish Water and to prepare them for negotiations with the unions. So Irish Water had a whole team of workers out there installing meters at all the houses. And we were then called in by the union, and we had to discuss various issues. And I'm under NDA, so I can't talk about what the issues were. But I will say that one of them wasn't wage. But, as a Boy Scouts say, always be prepared and, expect the unexpected. We prepared for wage anyway. We thought, what else can they hit at us? What else can they throw at us that we need to consider before we go into this negotiation? And the wage didn't come up. Fine. If it had, we were ready. And we had a really good session through the issues that they had mentioned beforehand, and we got to some good resolution. And right at the end, they said, right, there's one more item that we need to talk about. You need to give us some assurance that we are not going to have little old ladies with frying pans hitting our workers on the head every time they go and install these meters. And we stopped in surprise and said, pardon me. And they repeated it, and there was something very serious. What we didn't realize is that the workers that were being physically attacked with frying pans, mostly by little old ladies who were not happy about paying for water. They felt that it was their right. That's not enough. We couldn't have prepared for that. And so what we did though was we didn't just, number one, we didn't laugh. So when you're in a situation of when something is tense or you're in a crisis, even if it does sound comical, you can't laugh at something that is obviously of concern to your counterpart. But we also didn't act immediately. We didn't start just throwing ideas and saying this is what we're going to do. It's nice to just stop and call it and say, right, let's have a few minutes, let's go away and decide, understand, get a bit more understanding of what the issue is, go away, and then as a group we can decide what kind of action will we take, how are we going to stop this, what kind of measures do we need to put in place. I said to you in my last session, and I say this in every negotiation, that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So as we go through, we might agree on pricing and quantity and payment terms and so forth, and we'll put it up on the board behind us. So what we've agreed in principle remains there for everybody to see. But everybody needs to know that we can go back and revisit any other point, because we don't know what we're going to be surprised with at the end. They may bring up another point, or something else that might be, important to them as part of this negotiation. But we need to know that we still have leverage, and that we still have something that we can work against, and we can use to negotiate for whatever surprise comes our way. But again, don't act immediately. Take a minute just to regroup outside or by yourself if you get a call about something that's come up. From an anger perspective, it's very similar advice, actually. Anger is something that I'm used to dealing with throughout my entire career, almost 25 years. And as I said earlier on, it's a good emotion because anger means people care. But it is something that needs to be managed because it does detrimentally impact a negotiation. I've conducted many seminars and workshops on negotiation, and one of the cases that I love doing is a stock standard negotiation between a buyer and seller, and I give it to the whole class, exactly the same instructions. And I tell them, go find somewhere in the campus away from each other so you can't hear each other, far away, negotiate this and get back to me in 30 minutes, and let's debrief and see where you're at and how you resolve this negotiation. What they don't know is that 30% of the buyers on one side have been told they've got a secret instruction which says you need to be angry, extremely angry. So for 5 to 10 minutes, you need to shout and scream and throw your toys completely, and then for the next 20 minutes, start seeing if you can bring it together and see if you can have some kind of outcome. When the groups get back to us, I've yet to see one of those 30%. I've yet to see one of those cases resolved properly. So we often end up in an impasse, or we end up with a bad deal, or usually with an impasse with no deal. Whereas everybody else, as quite a stock standard negotiation, has been through a process. I've yet to see a physical fight, but I think it's come quite close. But it's just another point I want to make on anger, is that people don't forget it. In an MBA class, I had one guy stand up and say to somebody, yes, it was a good negotiation, thank you, it was a great exercise, we all learned something from it, but I'll tell you right now that I will never, ever negotiate with her again in an MBA or outside in work. I hope we don't cross paths in the business, because I will not negotiate, because I didn't appreciate the dirty tactics or whatever it was. So despite it just having been a case, it still brought real feelings to the table. So if you are angry, I can recommend using this whole process, and this isn't mine. This is an idea that was sent through by Investec actually during this lockdown. They sent an email to their customers and said that their clients and said people were obviously making some hasty investment decisions, and out of fear, out of panic, we saw this. We saw the amount of the sheer volumes of toilet paper that was purchased, and people were dropping their stocks. And so what they suggested is this process of HALT, which is don't make a decision if you are hungry, if you are angry, if you are lonely, or if you are tired. And what has this pandemic done? It's actually put all four of those on the table. So, I mean, hunger is a real issue that we're facing through the economic issues that have arisen from COVID. But it happens in negotiations too. I was in a very big, 13.5-hour negotiation where we negotiated through dinner. One party had access to, it kept bananas and fetal food in the car, and the others didn't. And you could see that the other party were making mistakes because it was a long day. They were both tired and hungry, and were starting to give in to, make concessions that ordinarily they may have held out for. What do you do, by the way, if you're angry? It's quite easy if it's you, I think. I think I say easy quite flippantly. I think it's something that needs to be practiced. But the first thing is you need to check yourself. You need to stop. You need to postpone if you can. That is the most important thing. If not for a few days, at least it's for a few minutes. Go outside, regroup, think about, keep your eye on the ball, think about that end game. And if you can't, and I've seen this in negotiations, if you can't negotiate it, this is what I've been brought in for. I've been hired to help take the emotion out of it, and to help make, you know, sharp decisions and with clarity and without, you know, this anger that's boiling underneath the surface. But what happens if you're negotiating with somebody across the table who is demonstrating anger? And I see this as a mediator, by the way. I often get asked in a mediation, I get asked, how do you know who goes first? Because obviously two parties are sitting there, both of them are, you know, itching to tell me their story. And they say to me, how do you decide who goes first? And it's quite easy for me. If one of the parties is showing any signs of anger, they go first. Why? And I've got this picture right in front of you of an exploding Coke bottle. This is not my analogy, by the way. This is John Brand from Bowman's, gave me this superb analogy that I've used now over the years. If you're angry, you like a Coke bottle, even if that Coke bottle is half full, if you shake it, it needs to explode. You cannot put one single drop of anything else into that bottle until this bottle has exploded. So if somebody comes to you and they're angry, we always try to calm down. Stop. Let me just tell you this. Look, I'm not going to push a price on you. They can't hear you. If somebody's angry, they can't hear. Let them explode. Let that explosion happen. So allow the vent. Walking away isn't going to necessarily help, because what you've done is you've just postponed that explosion for later on. So stop, unless you're in a physical situation. If you're in a physical situation, of course, you need to walk away. And I have been one of those, I'm afraid, during a negotiation. But if not, allow the vent. So let that anger come out. And use it, you know, and try and hear what it is they're saying. Empathize. So when they're saying they're angry, even if you don't understand it, you can still empathize with it. And I'll talk to you in a minute about who's the expert in that. And lastly, play it back, not just for their sake, so that they know that you have heard them, but for yourself. Play it back to make sure that you've got a good understanding. Doesn't mean you have to negotiate now. You could potentially say, look, I get it. I didn't know that this is where we were at. I didn't know that this is how you were feeling. Let me take a day or an hour or whatever it is just to think about it and rejig my response or approach. Or maybe we can think about another way of making this negotiation work. Warren Buffett has got a certificate on his wall by Dale Carnegie. And he believes that this certificate, that this course that he took, the Dale Carnegie course, was more valuable even than his degree from Columbia University. And he said it's helped him more in life, and I agree with him. I haven't taken that course of Dale Carnegie's, but I have read Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I knew I only had an hour today, but every time I've got myself into situations of highly emotional and intense negotiations, whether it's in a crisis or outside, usually it is a crisis driven, but I've often stopped to look back on the principles that are taught by Dale Carnegie, and I can't recommend this book enough, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He was born in the 1800s and he wrote this book in 1936, and you know, the way that he understood people then, and by the way, we haven't changed, the way that he understood people then is quite extraordinary. I've just taken an excerpt of some of his principles, but you know, I'll read a couple of off here. Number 11, saying, show respect for the other person's opinion. Never say you're wrong. So you may not agree with what they have to say. It doesn't mean that they're wrong. But if you are wrong, if you've made a mistake in a negotiation or you've made an incorrect assumption, admit it quickly, get it done, and move past it. It's quite difficult to admit, I think. Which is why it's quite nice to have somebody, you know, a professional negotiator come in and help you with the side of things, so that they can shield you and you know, save face and, you know, maintain the ego and so forth. But you know, if you look at number 17, try honestly to see things from the other person's point of view. It's not easy when you're angry. It's not easy when you're in a crisis. It's not easy when you're caught by this element of surprise. So anyway, I'm leaving you with this today, because I think that this book says it far better than I ever could, and far more eloquently, of how to manage yourself in these difficult negotiations. I see that we've had some questions popping up, and I'm not able to read them from here. Maurice, do you want to step in and just try and help me read some of these questions, please?
Sure. So let's have a look. We have from Roberto. For many great entrepreneurs that are capable of negotiating very well naturally and intuitively, they probably do many of these teachings without even being aware. Do you think great negotiation skills can be learnt? And would a taught negotiator be able to hold their own with a natural negotiator? Or would they be better off engaging with a professional negotiator such as yourself?
So I think I'd love to say no, employ me. I'll take on your negotiations. But the truth is that it can be taught, but more importantly, it needs to be practiced. And it doesn't have to be practiced in a formal negotiation with billions on the table. It can be practiced even at home or with your friends, or I was going to say with your toddlers, but maybe I'm pushing boundaries a bit there. We had in one of my recent negotiations, the company employed or brought through a top negotiator from the Negotiation Center of Excellence, and I was a little bit nervous, admittedly, going in, facing this guy who's Harvard trained, 20 years older than me, and made a point of saying that a number of times throughout the negotiation, and made a point of attacking and so forth throughout the negotiation. And in the end, I've realized that, even though I had 20 years less, I took what was taught. I've been studying this, for the last 20 years and so forth. And I've practiced it and so forth. And I had to really dig deep to mitigate against a lot of it. But even he who sees himself as this intuitive and natural and taught, he's also had the training, it didn't really hold up. We had a very, very good outcome. I had a very, very good outcome from that, the negotiation. I don't know if I've answered your question well.
No, I think that's great. Can I jump in and ask you, have you come across the notion of System 1, System 2 thinking that was introduced by Daniel Kahneman about 15 years ago in the book Thinking Fast and Slow?
No, not yet.
Okay, it's actually very, very interesting because that book led to our very own mentalist, Gillian Gork, writing another book, Persuasion Games, which I'm actually busy reading now. And what's interesting is System 1 thinking is your emotional thinking. System 2 is your analytical thinking. And what's suggested is that to persuade somebody, you have to rather use their fast brain, which is their emotional brain, as opposed to the analytical brain, because the analytical brain is kind of binary. It's actually difficult for the individual to understand, such as statistics. Stats don't come naturally to us. Have you explored that? Have you?
So I haven't studied it for me. I haven't studied it for me. I'm going to. That's my next book now. But I do this actually in a negotiation. So when we go in, every single party has prepared. They've got a playbook. They know where they're at. They know where they're going. They know what tactics we'll be using and who's going to be playing which role. But we also have a role there for somebody. We bring somebody in that sits there. That's off the screen, by the way, in case you make the mistake of showing it up. It's off a Wi-Fi system, but he sits on the machine and he or she has all of the analytical and all the data there. And so, yes, you're right. The decisions are made through the fast thinking, through the System 1, through the emotions, through the persuasion and the influence and so forth. And people do tend to forget about the numbers. And I know this, I've seen it. As much as I'll have it up on the board, you forget about the analytics behind it. And you go in extremely well prepared. And the crisis or the negotiation itself is such a highly stressful situation that often you forget your end game, or you forget your bottom line, and you suddenly, and in fact the biggest problem you have is that egos come to play. Suddenly, if somebody says, I'm doing this on principle, you realize there's an ego here, and they're starting to negotiate who are not negotiate for what's right necessarily. And so for that reason, I have somebody there specifically looking at their data and information and keeping us in check to make sure that we are keeping in with our plan, our strategy, and making sure we stay within the realms of this, our high lows. And also, if other information comes up, if they say to us, well, we've done this research. In fact, was working with Land Rover. Well, sorry, I wasn't working with Land Rover. I was talking to the MD of Land Rover, and he was telling me about a negotiation he had in China about certain parts, and they went in talking about, let's say, 6 parts had made up as one piece. And when they bought it, the one of the parts wasn't as, as spec'd out within the negotiation. And I said to him, next time, when they start talking about these parts, don't assume it's going to be to the same standards and the same quality as all the others. Have somebody there that can look into it and see what are the options. So often I'll have somebody, even, and by the way, I do this on the legal side as well as on the technical side. I usually have a lawyer there who can, the details in a contract, if they come up and say, yes, your contract says this, I won't just assume it. If I don't remember, I can't recall, they're 500 pages long. I'll say to the lawyer, check where we're at. Equally, I'll say to our technical expert, can you go and check this out? And then I'll put the negotiation, that item, on pause until I have the information. Or I'll get them to nudge me and say, you're moving out of the boundary. And we bring ourselves back and check. That's a superb, I'm going to go and look into that book, actually. And that's a superb question on looking at fast thinking and slow thinking. And you definitely are driven by the emotion.
Yeah, so you mentioned Land Rover. They actually use car sales people in illustrating how to make use of it. So if you are a car salesman, your system 1 is your emotion, system 2 is analytical. So what a car salesman must not do is actually sit down with the client and start talking system 2, which is analytical. But start saying, okay, these are the specs, this is it. What you should rather do is appeal to system 1, which is your emotion, and use words such as thrill, sexy, hot, and those are the words they use. Why? Because it appeals to system 1. There's no effort in the system 1, whereas system 2 requires effort. Hell of interesting. I see there's another question here. What would you recommend as the first step to open up a negotiation conversation to a party that appears to not want to engage at all?
So that's the short answer is I don't know, because it's very, very situational. It depends very much on where we're at. And in fact, I've just come out of a situation where we had one party who didn't want to negotiate and used every avoidance tactic under the sun because it suited them not to. We were sitting in this contract for 2 years. They were trying to negotiate, and for 2 years they used every superb tactic under the sun. Brought me in and said, right, what do? We had 6 weeks to prepare to try and turn this around. It was almost I'm a trained hostage negotiator as well, and I almost saw that as a hostage situation where they were holding you hostage to this contract that is not making sense for one company anymore. In that case, we used a combination of many different tools. So the one was the media, which I don't love, and I'll admit freely that I put that at the bottom of the list, saying this is our fallback. But it's not just my decision, and we had CEOs and other people involved, and so we used the media to force that particular negotiation. I suppose there's a whole host of tactics you can use. The answer is not a great one, but it depends. It's very, very situational. In that case, we use the media to get us to at least get into a room and negotiate. If you have, whoever asked that question, if you do have a specific situation like this, give me a call. Talk me through some of the specifics, and I can help brainstorm some ideas on how you can get them to the table.
A lot of I've come across a suggestion that in that context, start trying to determine their interests, try and talk about them as opposed to anything else. For instance, if you establish that they like rugby, then you can move in that direction, and now you're opening up, and now there's something that I enjoy talking about. I actually don't know. I mean, it can really, really be tough, particularly when you hit a wall.
Exactly. That is one of the tactics. I think I can't remember if I did. I think in my last session, I spoke about, engaging somebody simply by understanding everything there is to know about fly fishing. We knew nothing about it. We knew that he was an avid fly fisher. So, rugby is another great example. So where you can build that rapport and create that connection, it still doesn't, sometimes they still freeze up when it gets to that point because it might not suit them to negotiate. They might be quite happy with the situation or the pricing or whatever it is. But as I say, I'm open to having that conversation offline if anybody wants to give me a call.
Brilliant. We're almost done. So we have a final question. What do you do in a negotiation where trust is missing and one party is known not to have integrity? And this could be in a partnership.
Yeah, again, the answer is it depends, because it's very situational. I spend a lot of time with my clients understanding the situation, but trust is huge in a negotiation. The example I gave you earlier about that MBA candidate who said, I will never negotiate. He will never. I could see by his face he was very serious. And it's difficult if you're in this partnership and there's no trust. I think, a variety of tactics we would need to be deployed. I think, again, talking to your point about, interest and trying to, build a rapport again is important. But also, as Dale Carnegie says, trying to put yourself into their position. So you don't trust them for whatever reason. What is it? What's driving this mistrust from your side? What are they doing? And what are the interests behind what's driving whatever it is that they're doing that's breaking down your trust? Again, the answer depends. These things are all so situational.
No, I think you answered it, and where I said people say it was actually from your previous webinar where you did raise the fly fishing, and I think that's where I got it from. So thanks for that. That's a wrap for today. We will have a webinar, another targeted webinar tomorrow. It's going to be super, super interesting. It's human-centered design and digital innovation, cutting through the noise. What you should be focusing on during COVID-19. So please join us for that. That's tomorrow at 10 o'clock. I'd like to thank Angela once again. Angela, I'm going to get you back. I said as much last time, and I got you back. It will happen again. And thanks to the panelists. And obviously to the attendees, thanks for being here today. Until tomorrow, that's a wrap. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Maurice.